Chapter 14. Sophie. He lies, she lies. Sophie stood at the edge of a black pond, swathed in white furs, a babushka wrapped over her hair, as she sprinkled sunflower seeds to a family of ducks. In the dusty water, the dark sky reflected as if it was a scene in a crystal ball, the three-quarter moon tinged with red like a severed head. The crack of a hammer made her shudder, and she looked up at the workers building a stage on the Gold Tower Hill, directly over the imploded hole, exposing the dungeons. Aaron paced the stage, a dagger on his belt, his coal-black eyes fixed on Sophie through his helmet. Two maids flooded the stage with buckets of soapy water and scrubbed the wooden planks, siphoning the dirt into the grass where it ran downhill, collecting in the pool at Sophie's feet. Overhead, a new message from Lion's Mane gleamed in the sky. Due to the attack on the Blessing by Tedros's allies, Tedros's execution has been moved up. The similarity of this attack to the snakes suggests Tedros and his allies were in league with the snake all along, sabotaging your realms to make himself stronger. The sooner he is dead, the safer our woods will be. The Kingdom Council will witness the execution at dawn, and the traitor's head will be mounted on Camelot's gates for the world to see. Sophie could feel herself holding her breath. It was the first message Rian had written without her help. Part of her wanted to admire Rian, the boldness of his lies, the ambition of his evil. But she couldn't admire him, at least not until his head was mounted on that gate. Wind blew through the holes in the fur that she'd salvaged from Madame von Sarachin's skim-ravaged box and magically mended as best she could. A short while ago, she'd been about to get on Hort's stimph and escape this place. Holding Hort's hand, she'd tasted freedom. She'd looked into the eyes of a boy who cared about her, the real her, warts and all. She'd glimpsed what happiness could look like in a different life, a different story. But her story wasn't about happiness anymore. It wasn't about her at all. That's why she'd stayed behind. Under her furs, the white dress itched at her skin, more urgently this time, grabbing her out of her thoughts. Midnight had long come and gone. In a few hours, Tedros would be dead, along with Professor Dovey and 5 more students and friends. How do you stop an execution? How do you stop an axe from coming down? She didn't even know where the prisoners were being kept, with Rian sealing her under Aaron's supervision while he met with the Kingdom Council inside the castle. The rulers of the woods had descended upon Camelot for a week-long royal wedding, along with their servants and flunkies, packing every last inn and guest house. And now, less than a day after they'd been dung-bombed out of a church, they would gather for the beheading of King Arthur's son. Until now, they'd mostly sided with Rian over Tedros, believing their new king to be a snake-slaying saint. But Agatha's appearance in the sky had changed all that. Sophie had seen the rulers' faces outside the church, looking at Rian with new doubt, new questions. He'd lied to them about her best friend's capture. He'd lied to the entire woods. What else had he lied about? They must be wondering. Surely this was why the council had convened a meeting. She glanced back at the castle, where she'd seen the leaders stream in before sunset, grim-faced and muttering to one another. There'd been no sign of them since. Sophie's heart hummed faster. She had to tell them the truth about Rian, about the snake, about everything. They'd never have believed her before, these other rulers, not after everything Rian had done to save their kingdoms. But they might believe her now. She just needed to find a way to speak to them. The pond rippled as footsteps crackled in the grass behind her, a pale, copper-haired boy appearing in the water's reflection. "Crystal," said Japheth, bare-chested in black breeches, his face and body scalded from Dot's boiling chocolate. "The first letters in your tales spelled out the word. That's how you communicated with Agatha about a crystal ball. Clever, I must say." Sophie said nothing, watching the workers lay down an ornate block of dark wood with a divot for a prisoner's head. "When the Mistrals told us we were Arthur's sons, I didn't believe them," said Japheth. "It took a pen to convince me, a pen that showed Rian and me the future. A future with you. You would be queen to one of us. Your blood would keep the other from dying. Keep you at our sides, and we'd be invincible. That's the future the pen promised." His cold breath shivered her neck. "Of course you're thinking, which pen? Lion's Mane can't see the future, so it must be the Storian. Except neither my brother nor I ever went to your precious school. So which pen could it be? That's the part you have to figure out, clever little cat. Just like my brother had to figure out that girls can't be trusted, even his shiny new queen. He thought if he kept some of your friends alive, you'd fall in line, but now he sees what I've been telling him all along. The only way to keep a queen loyal is to keep her at the blade of fear, to destroy everything she loves. You think cleverness can save you? Despair cures cleverness. Pain cures cleverness. That's why your friends will all die now. My brother made the mistake of thinking you could be reasoned with, but he's learned his lesson." His lips touched her ear. "You can no more reason with a girl than you can with a snake." Sophie spun, glaring into his hateful blue eyes. You think Agatha will let you kill Tedros? You think the school won't come for their dean? They'll all come." The snake smiled. "We're counting on it." He flicked his tongue at her mouth. Sophie punched him in the head, gashing open his temple with the diamond of Rian's ring, sending blood spilling down his brother's blistered cheek. Instantly Japheth seized her wrist, and for a second she thought he was going to snap it like a stick. Sophie wrenched away, terrified, but then she felt a familiar stab of pain, and she turned to see her palm dribbling blood. A skim wiggling back into Japheth's suit, and the skin of his face and chest perfectly restored. He backed away, grinning, as a black horse sprinted towards him, and he turned and swung onto it. Behind him, 20 pirates in black shirts, black breeches, and black balaclavas rode their own black horses, carrying swords, spears, and clubs. Japheth morphed into his black snake suit and looked up at Aaron. "Take her to the castle. My brother's orders." Japheth lowered his gaze to Sophie. "The Kingdom Council would like to see her." Sophie's eyes widened as the snake and his pirates galloped down the hill and out the castle gates. Nothing more than dark shadows against the night. "King'll call when he wants ya," said Aaron, bringing Sophie and her bandaged palm to the double doors of the blue ballroom. A maid scurried over and whispered in Aaron's ear something about the map room. "Don't move an inch, or I'll cut you in half," Aaron ordered, following the maid. He reached back and ripped Sophie's coat off her. "And this ain't part of your uniform." Sophie knew better than to argue. But as soon as he was gone, she tiptoed up to the door of the ballroom and cracked it open just wide enough to get a peek inside. 100 leaders were gathered in the castle's biggest hall, seated at a constellation of round tables that looked like moons orbiting Rian's throne, gleaming on an elevated dais in the center of the room. As the king presided in a clean blue and gold suit, Excalibur on his waist, Sophie noticed that each ruler had magically emblazoned their name on the placard in front of them, the names blinking and quivering like moving pictures. The Sultan of Shazabah, the Queen of Rajasha, the King of Merriman, the Grand Vizier of Kyrgios. The ballroom, meanwhile, had been completely overhauled from the stale, crumbly space Sophie remembered, the walls and columns now retiled in mosaics of blue, the floor embellished with a gold lion crest, and the ceiling fitted with a colossal blue glass lion's head that reflected the king's throne below. "So you're admitting Agatha's capture was a lie?" said the King of Foxwood, gaping at Rian. "In Uti, liars have all their clothes taken away, and they must earn them back. One truth at a time," drawled an 8-armed female dwarf sitting high on cushions. She was close enough to the door that Sophie could see she was wearing the same silver ring with carvings that she'd noticed on the Queen of Jaunt Jolie and the Elf King of Ladleflop at the church. Tedros may have been a coward, but he didn't lie, growled the Wolf King of Bloodbrook, also flaunting a silver ring. Except about being king, said Rian stonily. How can we be sure? Said the Princess of Altazara, curvy and milk smooth. Tedros went to the school for good like me, where you're taught not to lie. Clearly you went to a school whose standards were not as exacting. If you lied to us about Agatha's capture, then you could be lying to us about many things, said the horned king of Akgul. This is why we want to talk to Sophie. And you will. I don't expect you to take my word, given what's happened, not until I explain myself. In the meantime, I've sent my brother to fetch her, said Rian, his eyes moving to the door. Sophie dodged so he wouldn't see her spying. The king turned back to his audience. But now it's my turn to speak. We want to talk to Sophie first, demanded the minister of the Murmuring Mountains. She'll tell us the truth, the Queen of Mahadeva agreed. Camelot's own courier suggests that Tedros is still the true king, not you, said the old graceful Queen of Maidenvale, seated directly below Rian. There was no reason to believe them before, but your lies about Agatha give me pause. Indeed, there's even talk that you've kidnapped Sophie, and that she still supports Tedros's claim to the throne. Until Sophie vouches for you, and gives us proof that you're the king, how can we trust you? A sword shot through the air and impaled her table. That is the proof, Rian thundered, his face reflected in Excalibur's steel. I pulled the sword. I passed my father's test. Tedros failed. He usurped the throne that belonged to me by right, and usurpers are beheaded by Camelot law, by all of your kingdom's laws, as are traitors. I didn't hear your support for Tedros when he turned his back on your kingdoms while a snake tore them apart. I didn't hear your support for Tedros when I was saving your children from being hanged. The room fell silent. Sophie saw Rian watching the Queen of Jaunt Jolie, the intended audience of his last line. The Queen had lost the defiance she'd showed in the church, her head bowed, her throat bobbing. Sophie thought of the way Rian had gripped the Queen's arm, hissing into her ear. Whatever he'd said had made its mark. I lied about Agatha's capture, because I hoped to have her in my dungeons before the people knew otherwise, Rian declared to the council. Now that they know Agatha and her friends are free, they sense a threat to Camelot's new king. And that gives Agatha power. Power that endangers not only my kingdom, but all of yours too. So yes, I lied. I lied to protect you. But I can't protect those who are not loyal to me in return, and you cannot be loyal if you continue to wear those rings. Leaders glanced down at the carved pieces of silver on their hands. Each of you wears a ring that pledges your kingdom's faith to the Storian and to the school that harbours it, said Rian. A ring that bonds you to the school and that pen. A ring that has been passed down in your kingdom since the beginning of time. A ring that now puts you in danger. And I am telling you, if you want my protection, those rings must be destroyed. Leaders murmured, a mix of amused chuckles and snorts. Sophie could see red rising in Rian's cheeks. King Rian, we've advised you repeatedly, said the Elf King of Ladleflop. These rings keep the Storian alive. Those rings are your enemy, Rian assailed, standing from his throne. As long as Agatha is free, she fights under the banner of that ring. She fights under the banner of the Storian and the school. She is a scheming terrorist, a rebel leader who will do anything to put her feckless boyfriend back on the throne, including attacking your kingdoms. Wear that ring, and you are aligned against me. Wear that ring, and you are as much my enemy as Agatha and her army. The leaders looked skeptically at one another. You are right, King Rian. Excalibur would not move from the stone for you unless the throne is yours, said the Empress of Pootsie, wrapped in goose feathers. I believe you are the true king, and Tedros is a false one. No one can deny that. It is why we did not oppose your decision to punish him and his princess. But to imply Agatha is a terrorist, that is a bridge too far. Especially considering you're the proven liar, said the Duke of Hamlin. King Arthur once wore the same ring you want us to destroy. Then the Mistrals became his advisers, and it was said that he destroyed his ring at their urging. That he destroyed Camelot's ring forever. It is why Tedros never wore it, and why you never took possession of it. Arthur died an ignoble death. Burning his ring brought him nothing. Because he was too weak to recognize the enemy, Rian pounced. Or because he listened to voices like yours, the Duke lambasted. Why should we believe you over thousands of years of tradition? Why should we believe you over a school that has taught our own children, or a princess who is a hero in these woods? Agatha may have colluded with a usurper, wittingly or not, but she is trained in the ways of good, and the first rule of good is that it defends, not attacks. Rian raised a brow. Really? He thrust a glowing fingertip at the doors, which swung open, and a sparrow, a hawk, and an eagle flew in, each wearing the royal collar of a kingdom messenger and carrying a scroll in their talons or beaks. The birds dropped their messages to their patron leaders. "A break-in at my castle?" the King of Foxwood blurted, reading his scroll.
"Fairy nest set on fire in Gillikin,"
gasped the Fairy Queen, reading hers. "My son has been wounded," said the Ice Giant of Frost Plains, looking up from his scroll. "He says he escaped. They were masked men in black, like the snake." "The snake is dead," Rian retorted. "But those who conspired with him are not. This is the work of Agatha and her school. She will do anything to dampen support for the real king, including disrupting the wedding and sabotaging your realms while you are all gathered here. Are you willing to see your kingdoms ripped apart again, after I put them back together?" The gall of his lies made Sophie gasp. These were Japheth's attacks. She'd seen him ride off with his men. He'd attacked the woods to help his brother win the throne, and now he was attacking the woods again to keep him there. And the sheer lunacy of the idea that it was her best friend behind it. Agatha? Attacking Gillikin? Attacking Foxwood? 2 Ever-Kingdoms? Said the Ooty Queen, as if reading Sophie's thoughts.
"Except Agatha was spotted causing chaos in my kingdom just days ago,"
the Fairy Queen of Gillikin countered.
"If fairy nests were burned tonight, it could very well be her doing."
"And I saw young boys in black masks at the church," added the Ice Giant of Frost Plains. "The ones that set off the bombs. They could have been students from the school."
"Princess Agatha protects kingdoms. She doesn't hurt them,"
the Princess of Altazara pooh-poohed. "All of us know her fairy tale." "The Storians' version," the King of Foxwood piped in. "The only version, the true version," the Duke of Hamlin spouted. "Sophie is Agatha's best friend," the Sultan of Shazabah cut in. "We need to hear from Camelot's future queen." "Hear, hear!" piped the other leaders at his table. This is my chance, Sophie thought, about to throttle in and expose Rian, to scream the truth and save herself and her friends. But then the King of Foxwood stood up. "My castle is being attacked, and all of you are worried about hearing from a reader instead of trusting the king who saved your kingdoms?" He turned to Rian. "You need to stop these terrorists at once."
"Like you did the snake,"
the Fairy Queen pleaded. "The rebels are moving east, my hawk tells me," said the Ice Giant of Frost Plains. The bird perched on his shoulder. "They'll attack the 4-Point Kingdoms next. Then, who knows?" The room went quiet. No one was defending Agatha any more. Like a school of fish, Sophie thought. How quickly they turned. I'll commit my royal guard, the Queen of Mahadeva announced. They'll find these rebels. My men will join yours, said the minister of the Murmuring Mountains. I don't trust never-guards in my kingdom, said the King of Foxwood.
Or mine,
said the Fairy Queen of Gillikin.
And by the time you send word to your guards, the rebels will have sacked a dozen more realms. They know we're all here for the wedding. Our kingdoms are vulnerable, and they're moving too fast for us to send alerts or mount a defense. We need King Rian and his men to ride out at once.
Ripples of assent swept across the room until all eyes were on the king. You want me to stop Agatha's attacks? He said, reclining in his throne. You want me to risk my life and my knights? Well then, I expect you to show me loyalty in return. His fingertip glowed, and a small blue fire appeared in front of each leader's face, flickering in mid-air. Rian's eyes smouldered with the reflection of 100 flames. Burn your rings, he commanded. Burn your rings and pledge your faith to me over Agatha and her school. To me over the Storian. Then I'll help you. The leaders froze, their eyes wide. Rian's gaze deepened. All those who want my protection, burn them now. Sophie's heart stopped. The rulers scanned the room. For a moment, none of them moved. Then the King of Foxwood slipped off his silver ring and put it into the blue flame. The ring melted, crackle, whish, pop, and burst into a puff of white-silver smoke. The Fairy Queen of Gillikin and the Frost Plains King both glanced at each other. Neither took off their ring. But the Queen of Jaunt Jolie did. She slipped it into her fire, crackle, whish, pop. Then a plume of white. No one else followed. The flames cooled and vanished. 2 rings, Rian said, toying with each word. He turned to his guards. Send men to protect Foxwood and Jaunt Jolie from further attacks, he said, before looking back at the council. The rest of you are on your own. Relieved, Sophie leaned against the door, thankful most of the rulers had resisted the king, only to see Rian staring right at her, as if he'd known she was there all along. He swished his lit finger, and the doors swept open before she could move back. She tumbled forward and crashed into the ballroom, landing hard on the marble floor. Slowly, she raised her eyes to the entirety of the Kingdom Council, peering down at her. My love, Rian cooed. Sophie rose to her feet, the white dress burning at her skin more than ever. The council has a few questions for you before today's execution, said the king. Perhaps you can help them come to their senses. 2 guards subtly moved in behind Sophie, Bieber and Thiago. She could see their hands on their swords. A threat. Sophie turned to the leaders, cool and composed. "At your service," she said. The Fairy Queen of Gillikin stood up.
"Is Agatha our enemy?"
"Is the school behind these attacks?" asked the ice giant of Frost Plains, rising too.
"Must Tedros die?"
asked the Ooty Queen, standing on her cushions. Sophie could see the fear in their faces, in all the leaders' faces. The tension in the room was so thick it squeezed at her throat, sealing her voice in. All she had to say was one word. No. The pirates would kill her, but it would be too late. The woods would know the monster that was on the throne. Tedros and her friends would be saved. Rian would be thrown to the wolves. Sophie took in the dead green glass of the king's eyes, the sneer of his lips. It was the same way Japheth had looked at her when he told her his brother would no longer play nice. Not after she'd used Lion's Mane's messages to reach Agatha. But even so, Rian still needed her. Her reassurance would make the rest of these leaders dance to his tune. Bringing her here was a risk, of course. But Rian was betting on the fact that Sophie always did what was best for herself. That she'd stand behind him to stay alive, that her own life was more valuable to her than telling the truth. Sophie glared back at him. He'd miscalculated. Rian realized what she was about to do. He launched to his feet, his face turning the colour of Japheth's. Sophie opened her mouth to answer the counsel. Then she saw something. At a table in the back near the window, a man, dressed in a brown coat and hood, his face in shadow. He was playing with the silver ring on his hand, reflecting the moonlight so it would catch Sophie's attention. She saw the name on his placard. Sophie's heart blasted like a cannon shot. The hooded man gave her a sharp move of his head, telling her in no uncertain terms how to answer the leader's questions. Sophie searched the whites of his eyes, gleaming through the darkness under his hood. She turned back to her questioners. "Yes," she said. "Agatha is your enemy. The school is behind these attacks. Tedros must die." The crowd thrummed like a shaken beehive. Rian gaped at Sophie from the throne. Suddenly Aaron accosted him, clutching a large scroll of parchment. Sophie didn't wait to see what it was about. With Rian distracted, she rushed into the room, heading straight for where she'd glimpsed the hooded man. But she couldn't see him anymore, with the leaders crowded around tables, frantically conversing and pointing at their rings, their voices rising. Behind her, Rian and Aaron argued over a map, the snake's quest map. Except from this angle, it looked like all the figurines on it were gone. I must be seeing it wrong, Sophie thought. But then she caught Rian looking up, searching for her. Sophie ducked along the rims of the tables in a squat, scooting towards the back of the room. She could see leaders streaming out the doors, asking maids to call their transports, while others remained in heated debate. She spotted the ice giant of Frost Plains and the Queen of Gillikin together in the corner, conjuring a magical fire before burning their rings at the same time. Crackle, wish, pop! "Sophie!" the Queen of Jaunt Jolie called, hurrying towards her. Sophie dove under a table, crawling through a maze of legs and chairs, past jewelled boots and regal hems, hearing the sounds of voices and crackling fires, and dozens more rings burning and popping, until she slid under the very last table and came out on the other end precisely where the hooded man had been sitting. Only he wasn't there anymore. All that was left of him was his royal placard, his name blinking and swirling on the front. Sophie crumbled into his chair, her heart shrinking. Had she imagined him? Had she lied to the rulers for no reason? And lost her chance to save herself and her friends? Had she just ensured Tedros's death? She took the placard into her shaking palms. That's when she saw it. On the back of the card, in tiny magical letters that evaporated as she read them, "Make him think you're on his side." Sophie looked up. Rian was striding towards her, pirates flanking him. Stealthily she turned the card over, seeing the name of the man who had left the message in a forest green script. The King of Merriman. The last word morphed as it disappeared, winking like a changeling fairy. Merriman. Merryman. Merry men.